You open this door with the key of reason. Beyond it is another dimension, a dimension of truth, a dimension of freedom, a dimension of joy. You're moving into the land of both the ideal and the real, of the possible and the actual. You've just crossed over into the Capitalist Corner.
Where reason meets reality, welcome to the Capitalist Corner.
Welcome, everybody. As you can see, we have the new opening, and this one we can stick to because there are no copyright violations taking place here. Let me zip over here to the comments so I can see what's going on. And welcome to the Capitalist Corner. We are joined here today by the great Jim Valliant, and I'm sure that he will be here to rescue me from some of my misunderstandings. Just remember to please like, share from YouTube, and also subscribe if you haven't done so yet. And a couple weeks, I've got some great episodes coming up on the Rational Egoist, my other podcast. But for today, we've got some great topics. And Jim, I'm going to assume that you've read all the articles that I sent to you this morning.
Yes, I have.
I don't know. That doesn't exactly exude confidence.
Well, I mean, it's, I read it. There's a bunch of, news. I mean, what do you want me to feel inspired by reading the news? And news is a depressing, it's just one of the duties in life is to get through the news media and the headlines of the day. It's usually not a pleasant task.
That's just interesting. While we're on air, I just got a text from Andy Bernstein. Evidently, Andy does not know that I'm on the air now. Somebody has to let him know, I think. I think I've told him before, but, he gets confused too. You older guys, I try to give you a pass.
Thank you.
With your age and whatnot. There seems to be, Jim, a growing anti-Indian sentiment in this country. And Charlie Kirk, what Turning Point USA, is that the name of his outfit? He puts a post on X today that says, America does not need more visas for people from India. Perhaps no form of legal immigration has so displaced American workers as those from India. Enough already. We're full. Let's finally put our own people first. First of all, let me just say, everybody is my people. Right? Somebody doesn't get special treatment from me because they happen to be born inside a border that governments have drawn. Right? So what? So at some point, as America moved west, more and more people became my people by virtue of simply being born there. No. If the people with good character are the people that I count as my own. And the people from India that come here, by and large, work hard, work smart, make their own living and help grow the economy. And this seems to me like nothing more than just base racism. I mean, or, I don't know the better word, but ethnicism, maybe, I don't know, but it's very, very stupid.
And singling out India when it comes to immigration, that's when the racist, smacks of racism. Someone might have a position about immigration that says, anyone from any country versus the people already here. That would be irrational anti-immigration in my view. But on the other hand, it wouldn't smack of racism. Why would you single out the Indians of all people? I understand that India is there buying Russian oil and was there in solidarity with Xi and Putin the other day. So probably some residual resentment because of that. And it looks like there's, the bad guys are standing up to have a united front against Mr. Trump. And so I can only think that it's from that. India is... I've never been to India, but every person I've ever known, there's an amazing number of objectivists who've come from India. Really, it's astonishing, a phenomenon that I've known since, almost 50 years now. When I first moved to New York, I met Indian immigrants who were objectivists. And, I would express, wow, the culture is so cool there. And these objectivists from India, one guy just shook his head and said, no, Jim, you don't want to go to India. It's pretty savage there.
So, Jim, we've already got an abundance of comments that I want to address. The first one is from Chandler. Chandler says, and this is directed at me, that's very dismissive language towards borders, but I agree with the sentiment. Well, borders mark jurisdiction, right? Where a given government's jurisdiction begins and ends. It is not a magic line that grants virtue to the people who live inside of it, nor dictates that they get my love and respect because they happen to be born inside of it. It doesn't mean borders aren't important. It's just important that we know what borders do and what they don't do. And then this is something, Jim, that I hear frequently. This is from Deeper with Diego. He says there isn't any more racism against Indians today than there was last month. That just got magnified because of a social media story. He also says of Charlie Kirk that he's signaling out India because of that trucker last week. And this is the sentiment that I frequently hear. Okay. Social media is not real life. Well, the problem is it's real people. Charlie Kirk is a real person with a real audience that he's catering to. Social media is, while there are an abundance of bots, of course, is still made up of people. And even in the case of bots, they're bots that are designed and set forth by people. So while, a given social media echo chamber or, the algorithm that feeds a given person's, whatever it's called, I can't remember, doesn't matter, it feeds their feed. But it might not be indicative of broader culture, but these are people with millions of followers and millions of views. And this is not the first time that I've seen this in relation to Indians. Of course, Ann Coulter said to Vivek Ramaswamy that she didn't think he should ever be president because he was from India. So I don't know.
Whoa.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's some,
how broad it is. But I do know that there is an anti-Indian sentiment. Now, it could have been late a month ago, and now people just feel more comfortable bringing it out, but it's there nonetheless. What say you, Jim Valliant?
Well, let's develop a point that you made earlier. I have no more moral obligation to Mr. Charlie Kirk than I do to anyone from India. My moral connection to an American, my moral obligations, my moral duties are the same regardless to any human being, regardless of where they come from, not to violate their rights. I have a moral responsibility to leave them alone and uncoerced and unmolested. That exists with any person in the same way. My moral duties do not change because you're an American towards you, Mr. Charlie Kirk. We do not take care of ourselves. See, there's this Laura Ingraham, Charlie Kirk kind of nationalism. Somehow we owe our neighbors here in the United States some duty over and above. See, it assumes this altruist duty and a collectivist barrier to it. That is to say, unlike the left, which are these international, Bolshevik type lefties, we owe the whole world everything. These conservatives are going to rein it in. We only have duties. We only need to be enslaved by the needs of our fellow Americans. No, I reject the whole notion of moral duty, a moral duty to my fellow Americans or a moral duty to Indians. And my moral responsibility to all humanity is precisely the same. The government is not there to give me favors, give me perks at the expense of other Americans who owe me something, or vice versa. Thank you very much. And my moral obligations and duties do not change simply because you were born in Texas versus born in Bombay, India. Okay, it just doesn't. What you said there is really, really important. Yeah, there's a weird kind of resurgence. See, when I was a kid, in the wake of, back in the 1970s, when I was a teenager, in the wake of Martin Luther King, anything like that would just be obviously racist, disgusting statements that are coming out of these people's mouths. What I find distressing in recent decades, in the 21st century, is more, or let me put it this way, less shame about overt racism than there was back when I was a teenager in the 1970s, or so it feels to me.
Yeah. So a couple comments here that we'll get to, and then we'll get to our next story. So Deeper with Diego says, there are no more social media stories about airplanes crashing. I guess airplanes just stopped crashing in the past 4 months. No, but even if what you're saying is that this racism already existed, it's still being expressed more. And whether it existed all along or is growing, it's still a problem. And it's still directed at Indians. Of course, the media can highlight things. Of course, social media can accentuate things. But the fact is that the airplanes were crashing, right? Now, we can make it seem that it's happening more often than it's not, or that it's not happening as much as it is, but it is happening. It did happen. And these sentiments against Indians are real, and they're really occurring. And that ultimately is my only point. Now, Chandler says this. He says, well, no, not well. Borders ensure where you have rights. It's not just a line that a government drew on a map. Well, borders do not ensure where you have rights. You have rights whether a given government on a given side of a border recognizes them or not. What borders can do is show where a government has jurisdiction to protect your rights. That is an important function of borders. That is, in my view, the function of borders, is to designate a government's jurisdiction. But I mean, as far as them protecting rights, I mean, there's plenty of rights that are violated on this side of the American border that are done by our government, state, local, and federal. So ideally, yes, borders would dictate that or designate the area in which a government protects your rights. I have no problem agreeing with that, but it still doesn't imbue some special status on the people born on this side of that border, which ultimately is what Mr. Kirk was suggesting.
Yeah, rights are rights. And this, I think, is going to be a theme as we go through the rest of the stories here that I want to get back to. Rights are rights. They existed before the Enlightenment discovered them, just as gravity existed before Isaac Newton.
Yes.
Gravity existed before Isaac Newton in the same way that rights existed before John Locke and Enlightenment rights theorists, or the founding fathers. Rights is rights, and I got them no matter what. And the government is there to protect rights, and borders only tell me that, as you say, the edge of a governmental unit's jurisdiction to enforce right. But their job is to protect my rights, and they can't violate anyone's rights any more than I can violate anyone's rights. Okay, the fact that governments violate rights does not change what rights are. The fact that, as you point out, America violates the rights of its citizens, the fact that maybe there's even worse rights violations going on in other countries, doesn't alter the reality of them having rights, me having rights, what our rights are. It doesn't change. Rights don't change at a border. If you cross, when you're in a jet plane and they tell you you've crossed over some timeline, you're now in some new time zone. It's not, rights are not like changing your time zone. Okay, it doesn't alter when you pass into Eastern Standard Time or move then over the Atlantic into Greenwich Standard Time. It doesn't alter it.
So it seems Chandler's a little upset with me. He says that I'm doubling down on a messy formulation. And then he tells me, go beyond the North Korean border and tell them that I have rights. The fact is they would violate my rights.
Right.
That is the point. And that, I think, is a valid one, that my rights would be more secure in South Korea than they would in North Korea, more secure in America than they would be in South Korea. But nevertheless, the government does violate rights here. And if I were in North Korea, they would be violating my rights entirely, but my rights would not just disappear. And what do you think, Chandler? Serious question. He says that I semantically dismissed the concept of borders. He says it doesn't matter to him where someone came from. It doesn't.
Right.
Why would it? I don't understand. Why would it matter to me where somebody happened to be born, Chandler? I mean, honestly, I would like to see your answer in the chat. I care about people's character, not the landmass that they happen to be born on.
How would you criticize the dictatorship of North Korea without the concept of rights?
Exactly.
Without an objective concept of rights that applies to all people in virtue of the fact that they're human beings. How is it that the people, the question was, do the people in South Korea have more rights than the people in North Korea? No, the people in South Korea's rights are better protected.
Yeah.
They have the exact same rights. They're just better protected in South Korea than in North Korea. That's the distinction.
Exactly. And ultimately, if borders, Chandler, serious, if they're not lines that governments drew, then what are they? I mean, they're not intrinsic. They're created borders. I mean, the borders of the United States have grown many times over. Even a property line that I purchase is ultimately designated by the people who are, engaging in it. So I don't know what they could be beyond lines that somebody drew. I've granted to you that inside these borders, governments have jurisdiction, and that is, it's not a leftist thing to say borders are to say borders are just a line. That's not a leftist thing, Chandler. Okay.
Hope not.
Oh, so
my gosh, it was, you see these straight lines on maps. So take the straight line between Canada and the United States. Obviously, that's a man-made thing. I mean, there's no straight line across North America, which naturally divides Canada and the United States. But there's this nice, clean, you can you could draw with a ruler. That's a man-made thing, the border.
So what do you think about this, Jim? This new thing, I guess, that they're doing or planning on doing in Great Britain, this, what's it called? I believe it's called chat control. Yeah, it's an article from the Foundation for Economic Education, and they want to regulate the chats that people have on social media.
Well, even looking into private communities.
Yeah, they want them to be able to. They want to legislate what that private companies have to do certain things to your phone.
Right.
And I mean, this just is more, and we're going to have, we'll talk more about these assaults on free speech are just, it's too much, right? I mean, what do you think?
And I think that there's a intimate connection between, in this case, what I would point out about the unity of rights, which is the theme I think I'm going to keep coming back to today on this one, is that our right to privacy cannot be separated from our right to free speech. People, the Supreme Court tears up our Bill of Rights into separate, discrete rights. And there's this right, this right, this right, and this right. And they're never the twain shall meet. In effect, no. All rights must be understood as a unity. When you read the First Amendment, freedom of religious practice, freedom of speech, freedom to peaceably assemble, that implies a right of association, a freedom of association. It implies, as the Supreme Court has correctly come to understand, a right of privacy. Privacy cannot be, and just as my right to freedom of association cannot be dissociated from my freedom of religion, my freedom of speech, my freedom to peaceably assemble, neither can my privacy right. The Fourth Amendment says we talked about that yesterday, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, papers, houses, and effects. Okay, what we're doing here is we're saying property rights are connected to your right against unreasonable searches and seizures, which are connected to a basic privacy right you have, which is connected to your overall rights and freedoms. So if a government says, no, all we want to do is read your personal emails, read your personal messages, read your chat information, have some key into, whatever these servers, Discord server or whatever they are, so that we can check out what the conversation is going on. Could we be safer? Could we end some child abuse or predation on children? We sure could. We could also end some murders. We could end some terrorism. We do all sorts of things. But the violation of privacy in itself would be a threat to free speech. Let me repeat. The violation of my privacy in itself would be a threat to my freedom of speech. My freedom to privately communicate with you is part of my freedom of speech. And the privacy of my communication with you is part of that freedom. And you cannot separate the two.
Now, Persephone says, think about the children. And I'm guessing it seems somewhat sarcastic, but that is actually the justification for this.
Right.
And as it is for much of the to have these stringent rules against people's behavior, is they worm their way in there, get the camel's nose under the tent by saying we have to protect the children. Recently here in Connecticut, there was a ban signed into law on this kratom, and it's actually illegal in San Diego too. Jim. It's the only city in California where it's illegal is San Diego. But anyway, so I don't personally take the stuff, kratom. It's some kind of I don't know if it's a drug. People swear by it. Some people don't. Whatever. I don't really care what it does. But my point is they outlawed it here in Connecticut. And when I posted about it, somebody said, but kids are getting their hands on it. And I'm just like, we could outlaw everything then. Outlaw automobiles because kids steal cars. When I was young, kids used to take their parents' cars and come pick me up. None of us had licenses. So we should outlaw automobiles. I mean, we could go down the road and just outlaw all kinds of things that might hurt the children. But that's not the way a free country governs itself.
Well, think of all the crimes that were facilitated by the telephone.
But yeah, well, that's the truth. Yes.
Wouldn't have been all these conspiracies and solicitations to commit murder and all terrorists use telephones.
They do
very easily take care of the terrorism problem by allowing limitless wiretapping, by eliminating the technology altogether. You've got a point there. The automobile, my gosh, think of it. I mean, terrorists can actually get to their terror sites using automobiles. What do child molesters use? Automobiles. So what we need to do is, if we're going to think about the children, no. And then once you've got your privacy invaded with this, we'll just monitor. The government's just going to monitor. Then you combine it with the hate speech laws that Britain has, right? There's that Irish guy who got arrested the other day.
I was just going to get to this. Jim, you've got a real history of doing this.
You mean a methodological integration to my cognition?
No, you jump to the next story without letting me get to it first. You just segue into it. You do that on the other podcast
my mind
too.
Is an integration machine there, Liebowitz. My mind is putting things together and making the segues all by itself there.
But since you've already started, you tell us about that, Jim. What happened to this Irish gentleman?
He's
not the luck of the Irish.
Not the luck of the Irish. Well, under new America, we have a First Amendment where free speech is protected. Alas, in Great Britain, where we inherited the concept of free speech, by the way, from these English philosophers like John Locke, they have abandoned recently the notion of free speech. And so something that will incite is not something that will immediately incite violence, as is required in America under the First Amendment. Brandenburg versus Ohio, 1969 case. There has to be imminently, pressured violence. In other words, it's likely to create, will it really create, and will it do it right now, violence? That and only that is incitement. Hate speech, offensive speech, is now part of what they call incitement. They've so broadened their view of what might inspire criminal behavior that offending people. And so this comedian who's anti-trans, trans people are, I don't like what the guy says about trans people, this Irish comedian. But of course, he said things, he's been making, political jokes about trans people. So rather than recognize his right of freedom of speech, he's now could be facing criminal charges. Yeah.
Now, his name is Graham Linehan. And I don't like this. This is what I don't like about these news stories, because I go to look at the news story and they flash an advertisement over everything. And I don't know what I'm looking at here. But this guy, Graham Linehan, he was the writer of a show that I can't find now, but whatever. The bottom line is he said some nasty things about transgender people, which I disapprove of, but he has an absolute right to say these things. People have the right to free speech. He's not calling for violence. Certainly not an imminent threat against anybody else. But now I guess if you Father Ted is the name of the show that this guy was he wrote for.
Hilarious show.
Okay,
Father Ted. Anyway,
Jim, can we stay focused? We're not here to do an analysis of British comedies, which, by the way, I hate. No. I've tried. I love Masterpiece Theater for its. I love Downton Abbey. I love a lot of the movies, but I've tried to watch these British comedies, and they just are not funny. I'm sorry for my British friends. The sense of humor not there. Maybe it's because of the Revolutionary War. Or your sense of humor went out with that. I don't know. But those shows are not funny. And if Jim thinks they're funny, he's wrong again. Big surprise.
Oh my God.
But nevertheless, huh?
You're a savage.
What?
You don't like no British comedies?
None that I've seen. No,
Monty Python?
I have not watched Monty Python.
Okay, well, then I guess I can forgive you a little bit, but Father Ted is a hilarious show.
But it stands to reason for me. I'm going to use a little induction here that if every single British comedy I've ever tried to watch was dumb and not funny, it stands to reason that the rest are dumb and not funny. All right, maybe my inductive leap is not a very good one there.
That's a hasty generalization.
No, it was a hasty. The generalization was just not. It wasn't warranted. I'll give you that much. But anyways, so this guy's busted. Now there was another story of a woman who made.
When you combine the invasion of privacy with the chat thing, and then you've got hate speech laws that can get you for saying negative things about trans people, put that together now. Now they'll find something in your private messages to someone that they're going to construe as hate speech, and boom, there. What's the next step? They're putting the pieces together of a totalitarian state here. Obviously, prosecuting someone for hate speech in private messages would be a new step, but they've got the pieces now assembled. They've got the hate speech law. They've got the chat thing that's going to look into your private messages. What's next? Oh, next thing we'll do is say that your private messages can be hate speech and you can be prosecuted, ... This is how you build the building blocks of a totalitarian state.
So my friend Subby is in here telling me about the Vicar of Dibley, Doc Martin, Benny Hill, and says, come on, Mike. But let me just tell you, Subby, I love him. Sense of humor, not good. He loves to send me these things, on the phone here, and I get texts, and he's just laughing his buns off. And I'm like, he's like, isn't that funny? I'm like, not really. You want some good comedy? You could go do no better than Mr. Don Rickles. Don Rickles is the absolute king of comedy. He's the funniest person to ever live, and anyone who thinks differently is wrong. But and by the way, thank God, that the God that I don't believe in, but thank him nevertheless for free speech in this country to allow Don Rickles to say what Don Rickles needed to say. But there's also, they kind of mingled up in this story, Jim, about free speech. This other woman who said something like a hotel that was housing immigrants should be blown up. See, to me, that's different. That's not, that's not the free speech we're talking about. Now, I granted it is questionable because of what you said about imminent. Is her comment actually going to cause harm, or could it possibly lead to harm? But I think that a strong case could be made that it can.
Well, it would depend upon the surrounding factual circumstances. The same statement, we should blow up that building because it has immigrants. Let's just take that as the statement. In one context could be actionable. There's a crowd with pitchforks and torches surrounding the building, and you're chanting anti-immigrant stuff. And I say, torch the building. That could be regarded as criminally inciting someone. If I'm philosophically, let's say I'm a humorist in a comedy act, I say the same exact thing in a comedy club, and suddenly, okay, that was a bad joke in bad taste, but now it's free speech. And the reason why I can say that with certain confidence is America's history with communism. Communism advocates the violent overthrow of the United States. The Communist Party did. So the Supreme Court had continuously tested itself during the course of the 20th century. At what point does an abstract view, let's violently overthrow the United States, become criminally actionable? And the upshot was the Brandenburg case I mentioned earlier. No. You can say, I want the government to be burnt to the ground. I want like a communist. I want to totally displace the government. I want a dictatorship of the proletariat. I want the violent overthrow of the United States. That's the whole United States, unless it is likely to cause imminent violence. It is not incitement, and you can see that it's the factual context. And I used two extreme examples there to make it clear. Obviously, if you've already got the angry mob surrounding the apartment building, you're talking about likely to produce imminent violence. But in a comedy club, not so much, and a different context. So the wider factual context is what the courts will look to see whether or not this is incitement. There is, fortunately in America, no hate speech exception to the First Amendment. Words, no matter how offensive, Let me put that in italics. Words, no matter how offensive, do not justify violence, do not constitute a violation of anyone's rights. The offensiveness of words have nothing to do, nothing, zero, zip, zilch, nada, to do with whether or not, and your feelings getting hurt by it. I could say the most horrible things about you, Liebowitz, and no matter how offensive my words are, if they are not likely to produce imminent violence, they are not legally actionable.
People say a lot of bad things about me. I generally don't get my feelings hurt. I'm just not that sensitive to words, but so Subby says, my sense of humor is questionable. And then Nicole Hingle comes in with, Mike, do you like Buddy Hackett? Now, this is interesting, Jim, because last night Subby shared a clip with me of Buddy Hackett. I think it was on the Tonight Show years and years ago with Johnny Carson. And he tells a story about he's talking to a Chinese guy and he's upset with the Chinese guy. And he says, because of Pearl Harbor. And the Chinese guy says, wait a second, I'm not from Japan, I'm from China. And he says, well, all you Asians are in the same boat. And the guy says to Buddy Hackett, yeah, well, I hate you because the Jews sunk the Titanic. And Buddy Hackett says, what do you mean? The Jews sunk the Titanic. And the guy says, well, Goldberg, Weinberg, iceberg, it's all the same to me.
You birds.
Yeah. So I thought that was a good one. So Subby was good with that one. But now we have a case closer to home here with the FDA publicly pressuring YouTube to remove a guy's YouTube channel. And they actually did. And it's this guy, Jonathan Howard. He's a neurologist and psychologist. And he was posting things critical of the, what's this guy? The head of the Food and Drug Administration.
Right.
And this guy says that he's violating copyrights, which clearly was not the case, but it's commonly known, and they reference this in the article, jawboning. It's when government officials don't actually pass laws, but they jawbone with the understanding that everybody in there has that if we don't comply, we're going to have pressure from these folks. And they actually canceled this poor guy, his YouTube station. Now, it wasn't that long ago that I remember when the Republicans were very unhappy, and rightfully so, with the left governments putting pressure on social media companies to censor things. But I haven't heard anything from them on this, and I wonder why. But you read the story. Go ahead. What do you mean YouTube station? Okay, Boomer. What are they called? They're not YouTube stations, Jim?
And they're YouTube channels, I think.
What the hell is the difference?
It's the terminology. It's the nomenclature. It's semantics.
But do they mean the same thing or do they mean different things?
The standard term of art is channel when it comes to YouTube. You got your own YouTube channel.
Okay, the YouTube channel. I'll cave and I'll concede that I was wrong here.
The purpose of language is to be understandable and understood, right?
No,
well, being apart from its operations and
don't start stuttering now, Valiant. You stepped into it.
I know, but when I'm talking to you, my purpose is to communicate.
Yes, but that's not the purpose of language. See, you want to get into a semantic thing with me, pal.
Okay.
All right, but listen, semantics has to do with language. We're talking free speech.
Yes.
Go. What happened here?
The Supreme Court really screwed up badly when it rejected the case that the conservatives brought about government jawboning social media companies, and why the Supreme Court, like I say, looks at the Bill of Rights as a discrete set of a list of specific, discrete, separable, different rights that can be in conflict with each other. Your rights can be in conflict with mine. We've got to have balancing tests between rights. There's this right over here that's in conflict with this right over here. No. The Supreme Court's whole approach to rights is wrong. We have to look at the Bill of Rights as a conceptual unity. It's not like Section 8, Article 1, where the powers of Congress are vested. There you have to look at each of them discretely, separately, and very narrowly. Unlike the Bill of Rights, which in the Ninth Amendment says, no. This is just a general idea. The rights that should be protected are a big, broader one. And by the way, each of these rights is an interconnected thing. And so, for example, my freedom of speech, this guy's freedom of speech, when the FDA is pressuring YouTube, that is censorship. Now you say, oh, it's the FDA, our health regulations. Well, you cannot separate property rights and civil rights. You cannot separate economic freedoms from personal freedoms. This has been the ridiculous artificial separation that the right and the left have foisted on us about rights. No, you cannot have free speech and have violations of economic. I mean, when you have something like the FDA or antitrust laws, they are inherently in themselves threats to free speech.
You know, this free speech thing, Jim, to me is so vital because no matter how corrupt the government gets, no matter how bad things get, as long as we still have the freedom of speech, we can get the message out. We can criticize. We can convince people about what's going on. We can report on it. But if they silence us, then we're lost, right? There's really nothing we can do. I mean, it's besides pick up arms, but right. Even in that case, you'd have to communicate with people to get them on your side.
You'd have to violate the censorship laws.
Yeah. And so to me, this push against free speech, which seems to be happening on a global scale now, if what I'm reading can be believed at all. It's so dangerous, but it all goes back kind of to, in my view, to what we were talking about earlier, and it's what I was arguing about on Twitter this morning is that we have rights by virtue of being human beings with a rational faculty and volition, right? They're not gifts from God. They're not gifts from government. They are ours by our nature, and we have the right to speak our minds. And we need to be able to do so. And when governments infringe on that right, it's an extremely dangerous proposition.
Yeah, the game's over when there's real censorship. That is to say, there's no peaceful means of changing things. There's no justification for any kind of representative government or democracy, by the way, either. I mean, why should I care what people think if people are not free to speak? If there's no freedom of communication, it works together to say, why do I favor representative government? Because it provides us a peaceful means of changing things. And the critical partner to representative government is free speech, because obviously without that, you don't have the capacity to persuade. That very ability to peacefully change and reform things for the better over time is gone. It's a dead letter. That's the other thing about rights, though. And while free speech is fundamental, and in a way I would say it is most fundamental to the operation of a representative government, and whether or not the government is legitimate or not, and whether we should take up arms against it and so forth, I would say free speech is the most fundamental. On the other hand, free speech cannot be separated conceptually from any other right. That is to say, if I don't have property rights, if the government owns all the radio stations, we have effective censorship. Private property and free speech are essential to one another, absolutely vital to one another. You have to look at rights as a unified whole. You have to look at the Bill of Rights as a unified whole, understand what its implications are. And the Supreme Court should be keen to enforcing those implications. See, I think you're an old-fashioned conservative, strict interpretationist when it comes to these sort of things. No. I see a freedom of association in the First Amendment. I see a relationship between private property and free speech in the Bill of Rights generally. I see a right to privacy, the penumbra, as they would say in the privacy cases, of privacy interests and rights that are essential to the enforcement of all these other rights. If the government can come barging into my home without a search warrant, it is conceptually connected to every other right I have. My property rights, my freedom of speech, my privacy, you name it. Rights cannot be analyzed in separation or in isolation. Freedom of speech over here, freedom of religious exercise over here, right against unreasonable search and seizure over there. No, but that is the way our Supreme Court looks at it. Rights are in constant conflict with each other. The Establishment Clause is in conflict with the Free Exercise Clause. Only if you have stupid things like public schools. Okay?
Yeah.
Similarly with censorship, so long as YouTube is a private corporation, so long as Facebook and X are private companies, guess what? They can have their own editorial policies. They can filter it out. They can YouTube can kick people off their, because of their policy about copyright, say. They could have their own policy about copyright. In this case, they had a shoddy copyright. I agree with you. This is a pretty threadbare copyright accusation. This was really just pressuring him because they didn't like, he was saying something that the FDA disagreed with. Now, that is dangerous. Again, it's part of the building blocks that create a totalitarian state. You start saying, oh, okay, well, we're not really talking about his freedom of speech. We're talking about the health of, let's add the children. We're talking about the health of children here. And so if he says something about vaccines and children, and my gosh, we really have to eliminate that YouTube channel with government pressure. And see, is when the government pressure comes in, and every goddamn economic regulation is an excuse for them to violate free speech. I repeat, each and every economic regulation provides the foothold for them to violate free speech in just this way. We can see it with what's coming up later with the antitrust case, the Google antitrust case. Well, that's exactly what happens when you have such a non-objective economic regulation as antitrust laws. And thank goodness, they weren't forced to, disgorge Chrome and be broken. I mean, Google was spared the worst effects of that. This is another story we'll get to. But on the other hand, the mere existence of antitrust laws allows the government, Mr. Trump will invite them over to the White House or Mar-a-Lago and say, it would really be a shame if that antitrust case that the Federal Trade Commission is working on targeted you. And we wouldn't want to see that, would we? No, it gives the government the ability to threaten, extort, blackmail private companies into engaging in the kind of political speech that they find acceptable for whatever reason. You cannot separate rights. You cannot separate economic liberties from civil liberties. You cannot even separate the First Amendment from the Eighth Amendment, in my view, or the Fifth Amendment from the Second Amendment. Rights form a logical unity, and until they're enforced that way and understood that way by the Supreme Court, we're screwed. Each of them is in danger.
Now, Deeper with Diego, Jim, I think makes a very important point here that gets lost, it seems, on some folks. He says YouTube on its own has every right to ban whoever they want off their property, but by government threat of force, disgusting. And that's a very important distinction because I often hear people talk about private companies violating people's rights in terms of the Bill of Rights. That's just only government can violate the Constitution. Individuals and groups can commit crimes, but they can't be violating the Constitution. We've got
Supreme Court agrees with us to some extent. Thank goodness. They say there's a requirement of state action. A state actor. If there's not a state actor, there's no violation of fundamental rights.
I'm trying to find who said inalienable rights. Did someone say inalienable rights someplace? I don't think so, but I want to address Robert. Robert says the argument made is that the concept rights doesn't apply in situations in which your rights aren't recognized. In such a context, your rights have been alienated. See, I disagree with that. I think your rights have been violated, and there's a difference between violated and alienated. My rights aren't gone. They're just not being recognized and protected. And in that situation, I would have every right to defend myself against the rights violator. Here's where you and I think, are going to disagree, though. Robert says that inalienable rights is meaningless. And I think that rights can be alienated because if I commit a crime, for instance, and I am sentenced to prison, I'm alienated. I no longer can claim the same rights that I had before I committed the crime. But I don't think that my rights are alienated by virtue of a government not respecting them or a government violating them.
Well, again, it's nomenclature. Do we say violated? When you commit a crime and you're put in prison, your rights have not been violated. Okay, so we say, well, were you alienated from your rights? No, you have the same rights. And does the fact that you've been charged and convicted with a crime mean that all your rights have evaporated? No,
not all of them.
If you've been convicted of murder, they still can't. You do cruel and unusual punishments, et cetera, et cetera. You may have rights on appeal. Can they torture you? No. criminal conviction does not violate anyone's rights. Punishment for crimes do not violate anyone's rights. On the other hand, when government violates my rights, it's no different than when a criminal violates my rights. It's a violation of my rights, which really can never be there. It's not, rights are not like a coat of paint on a house, right? Rights, the founding fathers, the reason why they said that they're part of human nature, endowed by our Creator, really what they're getting at there is not the concept of God or even teleology. What they're saying is that it is structural to human nature. That is to say, if you violate my property rights, as John Locke would say, you have in fact turned me into a slave. You have destroyed my capacity. Ayn Rand would go further. You have actually destroyed my capacity to survive by affecting my ability to utilize my basic tool of survival, reason. Okay, I'm a creature unlike other animals. Being a human being, I am a creature that can only thrive in a social context of freedom. That is my nature. You know, fish got to swim, birds got to fly. Humans got to be free for their tool of survival to function. And so we say that these are natural rights. That's what the John Locke and the framers were actually getting at here. So it doesn't matter whether I'm in North Korea and they're violating my rights. It doesn't matter whether it's those guys in Brooklyn 40 years ago who beat me up that were violating my rights. My rights are being violated. And it doesn't matter who recognizes that or what. Like I say, gravity still existed before Isaac Newton came along, just as rights existed before John Locke came along. And that your rights are being respected and protected, or they're being violated. This concept of alienated from my rights. Well, no, if you commit a crime and there's consequences for that, and because you're being punished and the community needs to be protected from you, no one's violating your rights. You violated rights. They're enforcing their rights to be protected from that rights violation.
Yeah. You know, Jim, I think that I would really, really like to have a whole show here on where we just discuss rights, because it's such a fascinating topic and very important. But I feel like we can't do it justice in the context of talking about all these other, stories. But I do think it's great. I'm going to have to keep in mind what Robert said, and then we're going to get you back on with Mark, and we're just going to dedicate a whole show to rights. And when that happens, we're probably going to lose 3/4 of our audience. But nevertheless, I think it's an important thing to do. I think it's also important that we fight back against this type of stuff, because both Biden and Trump have tried to break up Google as a monopoly under antitrust laws. They're saying that Google has violated the Sherman Antitrust Act. And fortunately, a judge recently ruled, no, they cannot break it up. And I think that's great. I think antitrust laws, you talk about arbitrary. These things are disgusting. I mean, I remember, I think it was Alan Greenspan in his great essay, Antitrust, explained it, that, the antitrust laws basically say, if you charge more than everybody else, you're colluding. If you're charging less than everybody else, you're undercutting your competitors. And or no, if you charge the same as everybody else, you're colluding. If you charge more than everybody else, you're exploiting. And if you charge less than everybody else, you're using your monopoly power to get
no matter what you charge.
Yeah, you're screwed.
That's prima facie evidence you violated the antitrust laws. Charge too much, obviously you're a monopoly, using your monopoly powers. Charge too little, that's unfair competition. Don't want to undercut. Charge the same. We can presume that there is a conspiracy. There's collusion going on between the companies. Okay, that is absurd. And Ayn Rand was brilliant in her critique of antitrust laws as non-objective. And it really was a turning point in American history in terms of economic regulation of our economy. It really was that Sherman Antitrust Act. And thank golly that this judge did not do everything that the plaintiffs wanted, Google's competitors wanted, or even that the governments had asked for in different contexts. Separate out Chrome, to break them up into different entities. What they did with Standard Oil, John D. Rockefeller's magnificent oil company, which did get the vast majority of oil production and refining under its control. Nonetheless, it was constantly reducing prices, increasing quality and availability while constantly reducing the price of petroleum. Now, it did nothing but good. Standard Oil and its evil monopoly, and it was just totally arbitrary how it came in and got broken up. Well, that's what they wanted to do with Google, is break them up, and the judge stopped short of that. Now, the judge did require, I'm not sure if it's a male or female judge, the judge did require that they share data. And that, again, you see, you can't separate out rights, their privacy to their data and their algorithms and you can't have these exclusive marketing contracts with these apps. You can't say, okay, well, you got to, what is the game store or whatever, the app stores that they use on the devices, they had exclusive contracts. Well, yeah, sorry, if the exclusive contract is somehow competitively disadvantageous, believe me, the free market is the solution for that, and no government order can fix it. So I advocate the complete abolition of antitrust laws, the abolition of the Federal Trade Commission, the abolition of the Antitrust Division of the Justice Department, the abolition of any private antitrust suits. Why? Because it's a threat to all rights: freedom of speech, freedom of religious practice, my privacy. I can go right down the list of all the other rights that are threatened when you have economic regulation like this. And the worst and most insidious is the invisible, is when the government meets with them in secret and says, well, Mark Zuckerberg or Facebook, what we really want to see happen here on COVID or the Hunter laptop story are the following. And Facebook, fearing antitrust prosecution, and you can go to jail if you're convicted under certain circumstances of antitrust. What do you think he's going to do? He's going to listen to his lawyers and do the safe thing. And that you can almost predict that there'll be this silencing. And if you didn't know about that private meeting or that private communication, we wouldn't even know the censorship that goes on behind the scenes by means of extortion, simply because of the existence of antitrust laws. Forget them even filing a case. Well, like I say, it'd be a shame if we had to file an antitrust case against you, Mr. Zuckerberg. I mean, after all, you got Instagram and Facebook, and wow, that sounds like an antitrust violation.
The concept, we're talking about rights, we're talking about antitrust, free speech, and it's just such a misunderstood concept, this concept of rights. And what's even more misunderstood is I think the importance of freedom, what freedom actually entails, how much we need it. As Bonnie said earlier, we need, I'm getting rid of this guy. I can't deal with it. I got to block him out. He's just bringing nothing to the table. You know what I mean, Jim? Like I like the conversation, but when people are just bringing nothing, then they got to go. But anyways, which is my right, because it's my show. Right. I can get rid of anybody I want. But Bonnie made the point that in order to survive, we have to be free. And I think that's absolutely correct, but I think it needs clarification. And what I mean is that in order to serve, the extent to which we're free maximizes our ability to survive. Because people will say, well, look, the human beings have never really been free, but yet we've survived all this time. But the way that I originally did the mental experiment for myself was, if I literally was not free, 100% not free, I could not survive. So if somebody were to just chain me to a wall somewhere and I couldn't get out, I'm absolutely unfree. I would not be able to survive under those circumstances. Now, if you unlatched one hand and there's an apple tree nearby, maybe I can eat some apples. There might be some water. I could keep myself alive, not living a very fulfilling life. But as I become more and more free and am able to explore my options, the better I'm able to survive, to flourish, to live the type of life that makes life worth living. And that is why freedom is vital. It's not because if we're not 100% free, we're all going to drop dead. It's just that the degree of freedom is commensurate to our ability to survive and flourish.
It's the concept in inductive logic of, inductive inference by concomitant variation, or right, when things vary concomitantly, the less freedom you have, the less prosperity you have, or when I can tell you there's a quantitative relationship, and that's what you've in effect given me, and that is the correct way of looking at it. But look at the technological and scientific and cultural advances since the advent of modern liberal governments, the recognition of rights, the recognition of private property. In the last 300 years, there's been more scientific advancement, more cultural advancement in the previous 3,000 years put together. Why? Because of freedom. So I think it's good to look at both ends of the spectrum there. You had him chained to the wall, no freedom, he's dead. Okay, a little freedom, well, he can maybe barely survive. Now let's go to the other side. Modern liberal governments that respect property rights and freedom of speech. Boom! The explosion of the last 300 years in science and technology and industry and human prosperity and lifespan and well-being and no. Human thriving, human survival. I mean, just look at the numbers, look at the lifespan numbers, look at the population numbers. Human life is directly related, causally, to the amount of freedom that a society experiences. Yeah, exactly.
Bonnie Bertrand says, and this is so on point, if you're not free to act, all the thinking in the world won't further your life. You know what that reminds me of is, because if you look at the integration, both sides of the coin, is Ayn Rand's formulation in Atlas Shrugged, where she says that a body without a mind is a corpse. A mind without a body is a ghost. So yeah, if you're not free to act, all the thinking in the world won't further your life. And if you don't have the ability to think, all the freedom of action does not matter.
Ghost and corpse, both are symbols of death. I love the follow-up John Galt gives it. When you divide mind and body like that, yeah, sure, you put me in a prison cell. Can my imagination wander? Absolutely. Could I come up with all kinds of creative ideas? Absolutely. Will it make a damn bit of difference to my life or anybody else's? No, because I can't put those into practice, into reality. Property rights are the essential here for enacting my free thought. Freedom of speech is a good way of advancing thought, because the purpose of language is thought. First purpose. The next purpose of language is communication and advancing the general understanding. Okay, so free speech and private property, when they're both enforced properly, work hand in hand to ensure human thriving life and prosperity. And it is directly related, causally. Human well-being is directly causally related to the freedom you have or don't have. Slaves, what is the opposite of slavery? Individual private property rights. What is the opposite of censorship? Individual private property rights. What is the opposite of a theocratic dictatorship that oppresses you with its morality or its religion? Private property rights. I mean, you can't have civil liberties, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, nor can they operate properly without private property. And private property, to be properly protected, needs that freedom of speech and needs all the other rights that are incumbent upon it. My privacy, my ability to think and speak and practice my religion or lack of my philosophy, whatever, exercise my mind.
So Jim, before we go, Rational Frontier asked why he can't send, or she can't send super chats. The reason is because we don't have 1,000 subscribers yet. We are up to 504 as of this morning. So if you guys will help us get to the 1,000 subscriber mark, then we can start doing super chats. Now, Jim, we've reached that time. I just want to say to Jim Valliant, Jim, you are one of my absolute favorite people on the planet. You are a prince among men, sir. And I am much better for knowing you and for being your friend. And with that, I'm going to pass the buck on to you to do the capitalist thought of the day.
I feel much the same way, my brother. My life is dramatically enhanced by knowing you. Thank you for existing and being a part of it.
Thank you.
The capitalist thought of the day, I think, just emerged all on its own there. Capitalism, as Ayn Rand understood it, and maybe better than any defender of the free market ever, Ayn Rand understood that capitalism was the system that defends individual rights. Individual rights and capitalism go hand in hand. You cannot have capitalism and have any of your rights violated. You can't. To the extent that you're censored, there's no capitalism. To the extent you don't have property rights, there's no freedom of speech. Capitalism is the system that protects individual rights, all of them. And that basically comes down to your right to think and act on your own best judgment, so long as you're not coercively interfering with someone else's equal right to do the same.
Well said, Mr. Valliant. And for the audience, I love you guys too. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and go to the YouTube channel and make comments. That helps us immensely. We will see you tomorrow. Mark Pellegrino will be back, and I can't wait. Until then, in the words of Mark, remember to always check your premises.